Welcome to the Brevard News Focus. My name is Kevin Jeffrey, your moderator. This is the second segment of our topic on the plight of the Brevard County Fire and Rescue. There are some topics that are graphic in nature in this podcast. Viewer discretion is advised. Firefighting is a high-risk, high-stress job. The emotional toll can be felt following some calls. 80% of the calls go good, but then there are some calls that don't. And some of the worst calls for you guys that you have to contend with are calls pertaining to children. So how often does this happen?
Pediatrics are going to be a low frequency, high risk, high reward situation. They don't happen often, which makes them problematic in the aspect of when you look at a pediatric, when we're talking pediatrics anywhere from 16 down, and then you can put pediatrics in certain categories, but let's just say kids in general. You look at something, you're going to have a relativity to it. How do I do it? Do I have kids myself? I have kids. Do some other people? We get the younger people who have no kids. Someone comes in there and we do certain things. Some people have certain aspects to these calls, and to get into a lot of the weeds, why that's a problem, and it doesn't matter how you're wired. What it's supposed to be in the sequence of a human lifespan is children are here to replace us. They're supposed to survive everything, and we are supposed to leave them our world. That's how it's supposed to work. So when something bad happens, we are going to do everything at 110% to ensure that they're here to see that world. And so that failure rating, that interventional aspect, is max, is absolutely max when it comes to kids.
So is that weighing on the minds
Absolutely.
as you go to a call?
To the point where we have a partnership with a handful of people, and I'm not sure what's copyrighted, so I'll just say the partners and the people we did were able to streamline some of this stuff in our protocol, which is very, very advanced. The things that our medical directors and the people that give us direction on how to perform our jobs are very progressive. We do a lot of things in the field that a lot of people wouldn't do. We do a lot of things that people are like, oh my God, I can't believe Brevard does that. They provide excellent care. Their protocol, which is the book that defines how we do medical stuff, IVs, CPR, helping you breathe, administering medications, they're very progressive. And because of the high stress environment of kids, we've actually have systems, and the people we partner with put these systems in place that streamline it. So all we have to do is hyper focus on identifying the issue, like we've already talked about with the fires. We come in, we identify the resources we need. The problem immediately is most good lieutenants, most senior paramedic is going to immediately say a kid retires more people. We come to a call with 5 people, regular stuff. You get a kid and the kid has a certain aspect, you're like, hey, can you attach me another crew? We need now 7 people to manage this child. You have to elevate that. Well, our system isn't built for that. So luckily, it's so infrequent that we never really strain the system. You go into a hospital and you talk about pediatric care, you're going to have, all this fancy sci-fi stuff around you. We work out of the back of a fire truck and a pickup truck, and we're trying to put all this stuff together. So you're like, yeah, we need a couple other people, and then when we're done with that, we need to have level-headed people to replace us. And in our system, it's so extreme that we have things in our daily lives, our protocol, our policies, recognized by union recognition, nationwide unions, nationwide, that if you run certain calls, we're automatically going to get you mental health conversations, and we're going to release you from duty. You run a certain type of pediatric call, you're going home. You're not going to be here for the rest of the shift.
So walk me through. So now you know what you're getting into when you go to a pediatric call.
Hypothetically speaking, yes.
So you go to a pediatric call. Have you been involved with one?
Absolutely.
And so walk me through what happens. What are you thinking? You get the call. Do you know the condition that you're going to be facing when you get there?
No. So going back to the chain of survivability and going back, the first thing you get in is the bystander has no value. Mm-hmm. The greatest thing and the most horrific thing, as some of the crew behind the cameras were talking about, and they were doing some great things during the break, some of the greatest things and the most horrific things about what we do, and it may apply elsewhere, but I can't tell you that example, is a mother, a true mother with a child who has something happened that she cannot fix or the family cannot fix. And in our system, they call 911 and says, hey, I want someone to fix me. What's going to fix? The 911 people fix things. We show up, and that mom is going to run out of the house with that child and hand that child to a perfect stranger coming off a truck who's probably covered in soot or dirt, who knows what, and says, you do you and undo this problem. And then we move forward from there.
That's a volatile situation because you have a mother who obviously for the family are emotional.
Absolutely.
Right? And there's a lot. So you're having to negotiate a lot of things, right? So you're negotiating the issue itself with the kid, and then all of the trauma that is going on around the scenes. How do you handle that? How do you process that?
Some people don't. The way I tell people, and I know there's a disclaimer associated with this, is when we tell people is, some people walk in and let's say you have 2 firefighters and they want to do the service, they go through the process, they're in training and they sit down and they says, look, I don't know you from Adam, I don't know what happens, but you are in a very volatile job, to use your word, Kevin. And one person, to make this simplified, you're predisposed to see 2 kids in distress. And this other person can see 20 people. Person A may see 2 kids in distress in their first year. So that means the third person, they're done. Their psyche cannot handle it. The person who was pre-wired to see 20 kids in their entire career may only see 3. And that person will go through the career and they'll retire and they'll get a boat and they'll have a happy person. The other person who is only predetermined to see 2 kids, for whatever reason, that's just their nature, and they see one too many, they're going to have problems for the rest of their life. And we try to take care of that and recognize that. And as a company officer and as the union president, we put the best things in persons, and we are cutting edge. We've been to seminars and educational people, and we have a subject matter expert. Her name's Nikki. She's fantastic, and she's cutting edge on this stuff. And we stay at the forefront of that because it's not recognized. And there's a liability and a cost to that. And then you have people who have to go out of service. But it's like, they have no value if they're stressed after a kid. It's just not comprehensible.
So what is causing it? Is it the fact of what you said, that you don't not anticipating that a kid would find themselves in the situation that an adult
you can
would?
feel it. You can feel it in the air on the way to the call. Typical calls on the way, people are much more light. They're talking about different things. They're kind of going over things, but depending on the nature of it, it could just, if it's a fall, it could be a more casual conversation on the way. Hey, let's check the whatever. There's usually eerie silence.
So you kind of
You can feel it in the air.
Yeah.
People fidgety, going through stuff, double checking things. Everyone handles it differently, but there's a definite change in the air on the way to it, because it's not just hitting you. You get there, you don't know how many family members are going to be there. You don't know how they're handling it, not handling it. You don't even know truly the severity of it, because people aren't always good at communicating how bad things are, no matter how good the dispatcher is. So you don't know what you're going into. You could walk in and it could be a completely unfixable situation that everyone in there thinks, okay, they're here now, things are going to be okay. And then you're put in that situation of doing everything you can, but ultimately there may be nothing you could do.
It's an emotional roller coaster, right? I mean, you can go into a situation, you don't know what's going to happen. What are you facing? You get there and you see the circumstances and you're thinking, okay, we got to do what we can do. Then what? You have 2 outcomes. It could go good or bad. What happens? It goes good. You guys good, right? You just go to the next call, right?
It goes good. You still just went through that emotional dump of everything going on. You still, the whole way to it, all those things still happen, even if it goes good. So you're still drained after those. Those calls are draining. So after that, the batteries are low. You're hoping that the rest of your shift goes peacefully at that point. And then thankfully, we've gotten very good at handling when it doesn't go well. We've started addressing, we've acknowledged that it's a thing.
So it goes bad, and maybe the child doesn't make it, they pass away. So what happens in this situation is, so now you're dealing with distressed, grieving parents and family members. What do you say to them? What do you do?
It's multi-layered on that. So there's not actually a good or bad situation or a good or a bad call. You go in, you do the best you can with the resources available to you. Sometimes trucks break down, sometimes things don't work out. Sometimes the human body and an anatomy is unique or special. You just go in with your training and you do the best you can with the resources available to you, and you come in and says, look, I did what I did. Everything, as long as everybody goes home and the job is safe and whatever, the outcome is the outcome. It is not good or bad. Everybody says, I had a bad call, I had a good call, we did. It's not actually categorized like that. There's not a rating system. what you're looking at multifaceted is the child needs certain aspects, and there's a respect, and then you have to talk about your secondary and tertiary patients, and you have to talk about what is mom going to react to, and it just unfolds so fast that you don't think about it, and each individual person is going to act differently, and they're going to handle the scene differently, and sometimes you have to act for reinforcements, and sometimes you have to get reinforcements for those reinforcements, mass casualties, active shooter events, things that we train for that are horrific. We just had one not too long ago, City of Orlando, and so you have to think about, just like the fire, it's not the routine, it's not the CPR, it's not the starting a small needle in the child, it's that anxiety of what if this. It's not the routine of the training, it's that one little component that makes the anxiety. If everything was tones go out, we go do the call, and you know all you're going to have to do is start an IV, do this, make a radio report, and do this, piece of cake. But every single call, even when you're sitting at the station and just staring at the wall, which we don't do, but let's just say you are, there's that little component in the back of your brain of the what if. And that, sir, is that anxiety you're talking about. So it has nothing really to do with the outcome of the call. But sometimes calls get too close to home. Sometimes you put 110% in and you expect and says, I did this and this is what's going to happen. And that didn't happen. Now you have a personal problem. You have a personal investment. I did everything I could. I did my training. I know what I was supposed to do. Everything I was told is if I did this, this was going to happen. Why didn't this happen? Now we have a problem. And that would be what your class, that is the bad call.
So the outcome, go ahead.
It's not so much it's the wear and tear getting to the outcome. Not just on you, but on the bystanders, the family,
Right.
The patient themselves. It's all cumulative. It's all in the same pot. Everyone's being impacted differently, but everybody's there and going through it. So you can have calls where it would fall under what you would consider a good outcome, but the amount of wear, tear, emotional damage by the time the thing's said and done, it could be more than one that had a less than stellar outcome that was more, you got there, nothing could be done. It was obvious signs for extended period of nothing could have been done. It's very different than we did everything we could. There might be some viability, but who knows?
So does this always take, so you have a protocol that some people you have to send home after this kind of an event. Is it because of the emotional toll that it's taken on them, or is it preventative?
It's personal. So it's a policy, procedures, protocol that these things are available. It's up to the individual to do things. We don't impose anything. There's no law, there's no statute, there's none of those type of things. And once again, in Brevard County, we have system status issues. Do we have the ability that if we sent a crew home, how do we fill that gap? The biggest wear and tear of the stress that you're going down the road is sometimes you get, how if you get two calls back to back? I mean, this has happened to me. Like, what happens if you're on one of these high intense calls and all these type of things, and you're just trying to glue your truck back together, and you're like, hey, we want to do this, and then all of a sudden another horrific thing happens 4 minutes later, and you still have to go back together. So we also have to take in mind that we still have to provide a service for Brevard. We can't just start taking trucks out of service and say everybody gets to go home on a free pass. We still have to provide that service. One person's emergency, the statistic means nothing to the next person. And you can never predict that. So we do the best we can. We allocate resources on that day. And someone says, well, what happened? It's like, look, we only had these resources. We exhausted these resources. This is what happened. This truck's out of service. They're over here, and this is all we had left. Well, this is ridiculous. And then that becomes a stress. So every single one of these things is dissected, and it's called an after-action review. Reviewed, discussed. And if someone says, look, I've had enough, we'll figure it out. You know, call, here's a number. Here's EAP, here's peer support. I'm going to throw a bunch of $5 words out there, but here are the services available to you. And if you need just someone to call, here's another person. We make a phone call. If we have something really horrific, we call our brothers and sisters elsewhere. Hey, we call Orange County, we call City of Orlando, we call the City of Palm Bay, we call someone else that says, look, you have a problem and you're worried about the optics. Why don't you call a brother and sister of a department that they don't even know what color your fire truck is and talk to them, but let's get you somewhere else. And that is great, but it taxes the system, so now there's a balancing act.
You guys are dealing on a consistent basis, not just with the pediatrics, but also other horrific scenes. And, you know, you see people who are going down the highway, or you're driving down the highway and everybody sees the accident scene, and you see people rubbernecking and they want to see what's going on. You guys are right there and you see it. I mean, you have accidents, you have that occur on highways, interstates, right? And now that's creating a lot of difficulties as far as safety for the crew and so forth. How do you handle those kind of things?
Well, number one is always crew safety. So that's the job. It's always me or the crew, you them, is the motto. And so we want to make sure that we don't add to the situation. Rubbernecking is not good. We don't want you to speed through, go to the appropriate speed line, move over. Public service announcement, but try not to slow down. Don't slam on your brakes. Ooh, look at that. That's nice, but keep moving forward at a respective rate. That's usually law enforcement, and we work well with our law enforcement entities to make sure that stuff happens, especially at night in the rain, hurricanes, tornadoes. We've had a lot of stuff, flooding. That's the worst one. Then we secure the scene. We make sure all these things are going on. We have to identify how many patients are there. Is there a fuel leak? Is there multiple things? Is it involving certain things? So like every call, it's just dissected. We go in, we get bad report. We start off with the first responder. We get the dispatch, and every call has the same modality. We unfold it. We elevate it. We usually go too big. We says, okay, we have the situation under control, and then we start retracting it. All the highways, all those type of things, it's just another part of the routine of that call. We're trained. We know how to do it. We put the vests on. We put the lights on. We do what we're supposed to do. The lack of routine is the oddities. One of those oddities that is hot topic now is electric vehicles. They're spontaneous. They're unpredictable. They're not routine. They can be routine, but the problem is you run up onto an electric vehicle, no different than like a garbage truck on fire. You're like, okay, what's going on? Well, where's the garbage truck on fire? Well, in the garbage truck. Well, you're gonna have to get all like the first thing you think of is, oh, we're gonna be here forever. Same thing with EVs. Like everybody sees it, they burn forever. Everybody's seen that on the TV. So those are the new type of variables to it. But the stuff that you're talking about, that's routine. That's the job. Like that's
Okay,
easy for
there are
us.
some things, Mike, that are not routine. So I've read about people being decapitated. I don't have to go up on that scene. I read about it. I think that's horrible, but I don't have to see it. You guys are there on the scene. How do you deal with that?
It's all about compartments. It's all the same. I mean, I would imagine that once again, you have pediatrics, which is a certain level. The worst thing is the trains. You get into a certain lane is when you hear train versus a pedestrian, the first thing you're like is,
It's not good.
yeah, you're like,
That's
Yeah.
not.
we got
not
something to do that you don't want to do. Now you're like, it's not routine, but it is. You know what you're going to have to do. You know what you're going to see. You know what the outcome is. And sometimes you get surprised. Sometimes it comes in as train pedestrian. You show up and the person's walking around. You're like, I thought this was a train versus a pedestrian. You're like, you're relieved. You're like, oh cool, let's reset the mode and get the paperwork and let's go move things forward. But as you just pointed out, we see people at the worst. People call 911 because there's something that's happened that they cannot manage, or they've seen something they cannot manage. They generally do not call 911 because they have beautiful decorations at their home and they want to show us that. Sometimes that does happen actually, but very, very rarely, and it's not routine. You're like, what are we here? Well, I wanted to show you my, well, thank you for inviting us to do that. In the school system, when we do these pub eds, I'll do that segue Ryan wanted me to do, is when we do the school eds and we go and we do the walkthroughs with the teachers in the elementary schools, those are one of those oddities. You go in and they give you the thank you cards and all that, and we're trying to do stop, drop, and roll, firefighters, this is what we look like, this is the truck, this is the siren, and then they give you that emotional curveball where it's like, oh, thank you for, and you're like, I don't know how to handle this, it's not what we're here to do. It's almost the yin and yang, it's just the opposite of that. It's like, oh my God, that's not what we're here to do, but we have to do our job. Some of those things that you're talking about, yes, they get worse. They absolutely get worse than even the worst of the worst.
So is that routine? I mean, do you just get used to it? I mean, you walk up. Hey, I don't think that the average person can walk up on a decapitated body or body's missing limbs. I mean, and it'd be okay. I mean,
I'm required to answer that is no, you don't get used to it because of what we just talked about, PTSD and the things that we're trying to move forward to it. Unfortunately, I do think that people just put them in compartments and do it. And then you get into the coping mechanisms, and then we get into a whole new conversation. It's a whole new podcast about that. And I think the coping mechanisms, we could touch base on that. We can get into VAs and we can get into a lot of studies about that. And so I'll just put it in the fact that we are trained to identify that if someone is not coping appropriately, who becomes the patient? We become our own patient. You say, hey, this guy's coming to work and this is the problem.
so are you guys trained to notice this in each other?
We are trained to the optimal of the training that exists. In my opinion, the training doesn't exist. This is one of those things that, and thank you for asking the question. This is one of those things you get into the world where people pay their money, or you pay your taxes, or you call 911 and things happen, and we go to our fire station, and then we don't bring it. It's not our nature to bring it forward, and you gave us the opportunity to do so. And this is one of those things that is not addressed. There's no studies, there's no avenues, and the avenues that are there are not very well kept. There's a cost to it.
So
There's
is
a
it
political point.
experience, the experience of the firefighters that are on the job? Are you experienced enough to recognize when someone is not coping?
No, we're not. We're not mental health specialists. But we're trained to identify that there's a change in mentation. That's the term we use. They're not acting the way they're supposed to. They don't meet a certain demographic. They're showing signs of X, Y, and Z. And we use the same parameters that we go up to you and you're having an event and you call 911. We use the same mechanism. We're trained to use that mechanism for our same brothers and sisters. The problem is we're going to put you in an ambulance and we're going to drive you to a hospital, and then the hospital is going to put 20 specialists on you. I come back to the fire station, and we're going to go ahead and do whatever we do.
What do you say to them?
What do you say to the person at having an event?
Yes.
Yeah, you sit them down and it says, we're going to have a conversation. Do you want to do something? Is everything all right? It depends on what you see. There's a gambit of things, and out of those gambit of things, 90% of them are the wrong things to say. 90% of the things that we say are a trigger that says, whoa, I'm here to do my job. There's a boundary. You cross that boundary, shut down, and now we've created a worse problem. And that's my opinion. And there may be some mental health people out there to talk about these type of things. And I hope they are. And I hope they says, oh, we can do this, we can do that. Good. Get in contact with the unions. Get in contact with the IF. Get in contact with these people who are trying to put these programs out here. There's a lot of colleges, and I don't know, like I said, copyright laws, but call me. There's a lot of programs out there that are trying to launch these things, and there's a lot of false starts, and we just don't have the systems in place. To be morbid, to prove that is looking into the numbers, and I don't have them in front of me, but just look at public servant successful completed suicides. That's the horrific statistic that will prove that we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing.
One of the things that, I have some experience living in a house where, my husband was in the military, so he lived at a constant state of readiness while he was serving his country. And that's something that I feel like you all have to deal with all the time, is just always being ready for that next thing. And how do you deal with that?
Well, the constant state of readiness becomes the routine, becomes that little flutter that, hey, the tones could be anything, like every time, and especially the newer people, like, there's always a category where someone will sleep through a call, and it's a test, it's a rite of passage. People, no, what happens here is they get fatigued. They spend so much time being in a constant state of readiness that you never get into the point where you can actually relax. So you get to the point you're so fatigued that when the call does come, we're like, hey man, we're going to have to get you through this. And it's just a rite of passage. It happens. Things happen. Trucks break down. Those type of things happen. We train on it. We have a great training personnel. And what we do to get you from point A to point B is when they do training, we actually put you as an extra person in the fire department. And what I tell my people, and what the union supports with the fire service at every level, is that category, when that person comes into the fire station to do their orientation, to go on calls, to run people with their mentor, and says, hey, my lieutenant's going to tell me that, the senior paramedic's going to tell me this. They're not there to do the routine. Can you talk to a patient? Can you find their pulse? You're there to be infiltrated into the culture. You're going to spend a third of your life in that fire department, roughly. We work every third day. And that's going to be your new family. And you got to trust these people. And you got to put your life on their line. And they're going to put their life on your line. And that is that. When you build that and you have that routine and you have that crew, that's when you make that segue past the. Outside of that, no, it's a very frustrating couple of years when you first learn that. And especially when you become a paramedic. When you become a paramedic, all of a sudden you're the one in charge to make those decisions. You go right back into that cycle. If you were hired as an EMT, you go to paramedic school through the system. 2 or 3 years into the system, you hit the reset button. You have to go through all that all over again. But now you're in charge. Same thing when you become a lieutenant. Now you're in charge of a fire truck. You're in charge of allocating resources. You're going to make decisions that says, I need you to do this. And in the back of your mind is, what is my risk model? My risk model is, hey, this is a low risk situation. Is there a possibility for building collapse? And therefore you start losing sleep all over again. See, it's a vicious cycle, and there's always going to be a point where it does become routine.
So you still have all kinds of scenarios that you face. Now, we talked about the horrific scenes, but you go into a house sometimes and you just don't even know what the conditions are going to be like, right? So you go into some homes where there's hoarders. That creates a whole different situation, right? I mean, where there's only trails that you can follow through the house, and what happens in those kind of scenarios where the atmosphere is not what is conducive to actually helping you guys do your job.
That's the real danger with residential structures, unfortunately. Commercial structures we inspect, we check on, we have our safeguards for those. We do a pretty good job of them. But residentials, aside from offering free smoke alarms, things like that, pub education when we can, there's not much we can do. We go into the call, we hope that the environment's tenable. We work around as much as we can, we mitigate what we can, but ultimately, quarter house, narrow hallways, packed with stuff. Of course, the person is probably going to be a fall. They probably fell in the bathroom. They were probably wedged between the toilet and the door. The door probably won't open. They're still talking to you, so that's good. They're okay. They just can't get up. Their hip hurts. So it's more of a, you have time to think, but you have to figure out a way to not only get them out, but get them out in a way where you're not injuring your crew members. You're trying to shuffle somebody out of down a narrow hallway. The odds of you injuring yourself doing weird lifting motions on them is about as high as the patient being injured trying to get them out that way. So residentials are really the unpredictable. It's the unknown unknown. Who knows what's in there, and that's just a medical call.
So let me get this right. So each day you are on a call. Any call, there's a lot of variables to every call, right? Place, the situation, the condition, so many different possible outcomes, right? And you guys mentally are able to deal with this every day?
For the most part, everybody's got their limit.
Do you get used to it?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's your professionalism. It always comes. I mean, it's a fantastic point. There's a point where you says, hey, one day I'm just going to get used to being a lieutenant on a fire truck that goes in and says, these are my resources. I got my little card. I got my tactical sheet. I know what's going to happen. I know who's behind me. I know who's in front of me. I know what's going to happen here. If we get this, we get that. And you always expect that it's going to be. And it's such a low frequency situation that you could just be like flight idle and you're like, okay, we're just going to do this. Until it's not, and then you're like, do I have the resources? And then you have the confidence, and that confidence comes out of the training and only the training. Every once in a while, you'll have someone that happens to work enough or happen to be exposed enough where they're like, hey, not only do I have the training, but I have the experience. And we have a lot of people who go to a lot of high, awesome training. I could tie a bazillion knots. I could tie a knot that I could do things that you can't even imagine you could do with rope. And I was like, that's beautiful. But how's that applied to that? You won't know how that's applied until you do it. So then you get what we call a salty firefighter who has that experience, and then you get that, and then you have that mentor. We don't have. That's the problem leading into Brevard is then you start getting into the bottlenecking of what is the mentor apprentice relationship, and fires are becoming less frequent, more dangerous, faster, and hotter. Like sometimes, I mean, there's studies, and you can YouTube. I mean, sometimes it was, the synthetics, the materials we do things, the efficiencies of the houses, all these challenges are dangers to us. Electric vehicles, soundproofing of cars, all these things are wonderful things for society. Every single one of those is a challenge to our job to save your life or your loved one's life. And the experience and the ability to train on these things become more and more expensive and become less and less frequent. And that is the anxiety now, is the what ifs. And you don't know what you don't know.
So you don't know when you go to a home, is there a plethora of lithium batteries that could affect these circumstances?
So
there's just so many variables that you can't.
We do the best we can. We drive around. People always, we go around. We do things. We do area familiarizations. We get in the public. We walk through. We buy lunch at Publix. We do these type of things. And we try to stay in the public. And it's not just like we need to do these things. We go to walk through the public, especially with new people. Put your head on a swivel. There's sprinkles. Like, you don't have sprinkles in this building. We're on the second floor. There's no windows of this room. This is a very bad place to be unless it's a tornado. Like, we're in a very bad situation right here. Plus, you're on a lightweight truss system underneath us. So we have a lot of things that you got to think about every time. So we drive around the neighborhood. We back from a call. What are you doing? We need to drive around here. We're looking to see if there's new solar panels, and we're just trying to make a mental note. We do pre-plan. We try to stay in our area. This is a huge county. The geographic challenges of Brevard County is very, very unique.
What's it, 77 miles long or something?
It depends on what book you read, and it depends if it's the beaches, and they talk about shorelines. But it's a long county, anywhere from 90 to 70. You have 4 different coastlines, the ocean, rivers. Then if you take the Banana River aside from the Indian River, that's a whole nother coastline. That's the problem. That's the problem. So we do our best, as Ryan was saying. We try to understand our familiarization. We try to keep our people local. We try to get our people trained and understand. And we do understand the map book. And we try to memorize, what is the road here? How do I get from here to the hospital? Well, I'm going to just use my, no, you're not. You're going to look at this book. You're going to turn to page 17, and you're going to know where Wickham Road goes. You're going to know that this road that says Tulsa on the map book is actually Grissom. You're going to need to know these things because technology fails. Internets go down. You need to know the worst case scenario. People are like, well, I'm just going to use the Google to do all this stuff. We are that contingency plan. There is no 911 for 911. So when people don't have those things that made them part of society, they need us. And that's just it. It's acceptable. I think I can come full back and say for the most people, it's just what it is. Some people pop out. Like, there is a high attrition rate, not just for Brevard County challenges, but in our field, there is a huge nationwide problem with public servants right now.
Can you, is there a predictor that you can actually ferret out those who can't handle the pressure?
No.
You don't know until you know.
Right. Once again, training, there's so many parameters and so many things that training, people could do these awesome things, and then people just can't handle it here. There's no way to know. And that's challenging. It's challenging to know that you have to be in charge of that person and identify that, hey, there's a moment. And you never know. They could be great for 10 years and all of a sudden something happens.
You never know what their perfect set
Yeah,
of circumstances are that will be their I'm done. Everybody has something. Everything lines up just a certain way, and that is their I'm done. You don't know what it is until it happens.
And it changes.
Yeah.
And it could be a small thing, or
Right.
Yeah,
it doesn't have to be something huge, right?
Someone could have a kid and something happens with that child, and they may have been a firefighter that worked to work a certain way 6 years ago, and last 3 years they had all these new problems, and now they have new trigger points. And so you got to be dynamic, and you have to have these conversations, and you have to know what's going on. And it's interpersonal. Once again, you get into the culture of the firehouse. We know this. We know what's going on. We have these type of things, and you just got to stay in tune.
Brevard County Fire and Rescue is at an impasse with the county of Brevard County, and we want to talk about the problems with that impasse when we come back.